Ariana started her adventurous life of travel in her 20s when she set off to travel the world. Whilst in Brazil, Ariana applied for a teaching job in Cusco, Peru, and this is where her love of the area started. 4 years later, and still based in Cusco, Ariana founded a travel agency, Appas Peru, that offers alternative treks to lesser known locations on the Inca Trail. Now based in Australia with her family, Ariana is still very closely connected to the place she once called home, and as a family they make regular visits. If you're considering a family trip to Peru, then Ariana has the first-hand knowledge and experience of how to plan it, what to see, and plenty of valuable tips.
Peru does come up in the group quite frequently as somewhere that families haven't yet been to, but they want to, and it's on their bucket list. But I think they're a little bit nervous about how to go about it. So, in your own experience, what sort of trekking have you done with your own kids, and what would you recommend to other families?
Right now, my kids are 4 and 7, and so the last time we were in Peru, so we're going to Peru this year, they were like 22 months and 5, which isn't kind of ages when I would entirely recommend to take them trekking, unless you're really desperate to go to Peru, like maybe you would postpone it. So I've done treks with them, and it's completely achievable if you want to, but you need to be a confident outdoors kind of person if you're going to take that on. I was thinking, like, if you've got a 10-year-old child and you think you're going to do a trek in Peru, you need to prepare them in your home country before going to Peru. You know, take them out on a 5-hour or 6-hour trek at home and just see how they go before you book.
So, as well as getting your fitness up, it's having the stamina as well, isn't it, to be able to complete the walking.
So like my 7-year-old, she's probably actually can do the trekking okay, but the mental stamina wouldn't be there in terms of, like, if you're going to trek, like even for an adult, trekking 5 or 6 hours when it's just lots of steps is a mental challenge as much. Even if you're fit, it's a mental challenge. So I think with children, like probably between 7 and 10 years, there's a maturity aspect that you're looking for, which they're probably fit enough physically, but it's a huge challenge. If you're going to do the Inca Trail, you have to buy your permit 6 to 8 months in advance.
How many people do they limit it to per day then, out of interest?
So for the classic 4-day Inca Trail, which is the famous one, it's 500 people per day, which is 200 trekkers and 300 trekking staff. So, for example, in my company, if we have a group of 4, we also have like probably about 10 trekking staff. So a group of 4 actually requires 14 permits or 15 permits out of a possible 500. So they just sell out really, really fast. And if you want to do it, and so if you want to do it, you really need to get yourself very organised way in advance, because they're non-changeable, non-refundable, like the most stringent lot of regulations. Say you decide you're going to Peru and you're too late for the permits, there are loads and loads of alternative treks, which is what my company specialises in. And for families with children, there's one called Laris that I would recommend. The reason for recommending Laris is it hasn't got a lot of car driving. It's easy, but easy is not really that easy in the Andes.
What altitude does that go up to?
4,000 meters, which is not that, or 4,100 probably. So what I like about Lares is it's essentially a region filled with communities and local people. So you can go any route and any path that you wanted to take, and you meet local people. There's lots of chances to stop, play soccer or football, and meet the local people. So it's kind of a good one for kids, because they're not like just slogging it out for 4 or 5 hours with nothing to just alpacas and lakes and more mountains, which, adults can get into, but kids not so much. The advantage of any of the alternative treks is that you can hire a horse. So you wouldn't put your kids on a porter, you would hire a horse, and then they can ride for like quite a lot of the trek.
And also in terms of altitude, what would you recommend? I mean, are there certain places that you wouldn't recommend a family to go because of high altitude, or is there a certain age that you would recommend it's sort of a bit less risky?
So with altitude, there's mild symptoms and there's harder symptoms, like more severe symptoms. Most people have some symptoms of mild altitude sickness. The first thing I do with kids, like, and I'm probably saying under 10, between 5 and 10 years sort of kids, is I acclimatise really slowly, which means if you've got a short amount of time, it would mean flying into Cuzco, but then going to the Sacred Valley, which is just 2 hours from Cuzco and is sort of adjacent to Machu Picchu. And so I would spend 3 or 4 days there, which is a lower altitude. Getting your body healthy, resting, because I've noticed that you're less able to deal with the effects of altitude when you're overtired, exhausted, which is kind of in contradiction to most people, like, have to work really hard before a trip, get the bags packed, get on the plane, 12 hours, and then start these itineraries when they get to the other end. And so we always have like 3 days in a place minimum, even not at altitude. So, and out, I think to get used to the altitude, you need to spend 3 or 4 days getting your body in tune. With children, with like non-verbal children that are say under 2 years old, it's really hard to distinguish between a child that has altitude sickness and a child that's just being a 2-year-old. Yeah. Because they could be crying, they could be holding their mouth, they could be just throwing tantrums, and all of that could be altitude sickness. So I think, less than 2 years, you would consider why you're doing it. Not to say that you couldn't do it, but you just would have to acclimatise really slowly and properly, which is what I did when we took our 22-month-old, is that we went up really slowly. So by the time we got to high altitude, we could be sure he wasn't suffering altitude sickness. It was just 2-year-old behaviour.
When we were trekking in Nepal, it was feasible to hire a guy to carry younger children in the traditional basket on the back. Is that something that happens in Peru as well, or is it up to the parent to carry the child in a carrier?
So you can hire extra porters. So what I said, 14 for 4. If you were going to have a child and you wish to have a porter carry them, you would buy an extra porter for the duration of the trek, and you'd put them in your own trekking backpack.
What minimum duration would you recommend to families spending in Peru? Because you recommended having, the downtime when you arrive, just to make sure you're not so tired and to acclimatise. So what would be the minimum number of weeks to really sort of get the most out of it?
I would recommend, 3 weeks minimum in Peru, but I really realised that many people, particularly Americans, don't have that many days off. So you could get away with a Peru trip in 10 days. That wouldn't involve trekking. If you were going to add some trekking in, I think you'd look at 12 to 14 days minimum. And my advice would be to just focus on the Sacred Valley, Cuzco and Machu Picchu region. And the Sacred Valley is a really interesting place because it's the Sacred Valley of the Incas, so they really revered it. It's the natural connection between Cuzco and Machu Picchu. But the sad or the weird thing about it is it's like one road down the middle of this gorgeous valley, and 98% of people don't kind of get off that main road. And so a lot of my suggestions for families is just getting off the main road, and there's sort of all these little villages with people, the indigenous people, living lives that are not that dissimilar to when the Incas were ruling, doing traditional agriculture, raising guinea pigs to eat for meat, those kind of really interesting things that kids, even little kids can interact with.
Okay, good advice. Now your packing tips, you have loads of packing tips on your website actually, which is great, but what sort of top 3 items do you think you would recommend for a family to take?
So Cuzco is a really cosmopolitan city. It has 1 million people visit Machu Picchu every year, and all of them pass through Cusco. So Cusco has everything you could possibly desire. They've got supermarkets with Western products. They've got pharmacies with Western products. So I don't think if you don't bring it from home, you can probably find it in Cusco. Top three things are the weather in the Andes changes like in a flash. So you need to be prepared for all types of different weather. So, you need short sleeve t-shirts as well as a longer sleeve and then a shell on the outside. In my backpack, I've always got a beanie as well as a sun hat. So layers, lots of layers is a good tip. Like sunscreen, because the sun's incredibly hot and burns really quickly in the mountains.
What about footwear?
I'd sort of think that a good set of joggers would be fine. Everybody should wear in their shoes a lot before doing a trek.
What time of year would you recommend going? Which months?
So the dry season in Cusco and Machu Picchu sort of starts in May and finishes in September. The good shoulder months are April, October, November. By December, the rainy season's really kicked in and it's really wet, and then March is improving. If you are going to trek, then you probably want to do it May through August.
Okay.
But it's colder, so you'll fall below zero at night. So in the wet season, you get wet, but it's a touch warmer.
Okay.
But if you're not trekking, then you can. I think that the wet season is a really good time to visit, in the sense that it's green. It's so much more beautiful. There's often a lot of snow on the tops of the mountains. If you go in the December through February, you might get wet. But if you're not trekking, that's probably not a huge problem. So you'll have less tourists around, beautiful green, misty valleys and stuff. Whereas in the dry season, they're kind of a browny yellow. So there's pros and cons.
Yeah. Okay, that's good to know, actually. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for chatting to me today. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.